Welcome back to Chuck's Garage. We're back to our LS engine swap, and this time Chuck walks us through the plumbing.
Hi, I'm Chuck Hanson. Welcome to Chuck's Garage. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, what we're doing here is we're installing an LS engine into a classic Swivel chassis. Now, in the past, what we've done is we've installed it using parts from Hooker and Holley, and if you're interested in the specifics, be sure to check out our earlier videos. Now, what we're going to be working on today is the plumbing. We're going to use Earl's plumbing hoses, fittings, connectors, all that stuff there to get this thing plumbed and ready to carry all the fluids. We're going to plumb the trans cooler, the power steering cooler, the transmission, the fuel system, the whole deal. Now, what I'm working on right now is the gas tank that we got from Tanks Inc. As you can see, I've gone ahead and already done the installation here for the fittings connecting to the, this is the pump side, and we have the fuel sending sensor over here. Now, I'm done all this. I'm about ready to slide this tank into place. Hey, before I slide this tank underneath here, let me show you a couple of things. Now, the lines, this line here comes off, this is the pressure line here, comes off of the fuel pump. This is the return line. This is going to come from the regulator up front there. This is just a vent line. This is just a rubber hose that's going to allow the gas tank to vent itself. Now, I've also gone ahead and wired everything up here. The red actually is going to power the pump that's inside the tank. Black is for the ground. And the green is for the fuel level sending unit. Now, since we're going to be talking about plumbing today, we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of hoses and fittings you can use and what led us to make the decisions that we did. For the majority of our plumbing, we're going to use this Prolite Ultra. Now, some of you might be familiar with the Prolite name. It came in an earlier version called the Prolite 350. But the reason we're using this is it has a higher working pressure. It's still got the stainless braided reinforcement. It's rubber lined, carrying all different kinds of fluids here. And it's got a tighter weave on the outside of it for a little bit better abrasive resistance. Now, to use that hose, what you've got to use is an AN fitting. Now, these from Earl's are called their Swivel Seals. And as you can see, the standard red and blue fittings are what you are probably most familiar with. But since we're wanting to be cool with this whole installation, they also make this Anotough fitting, basically the same AN fitting, but it comes with a hard anodized finish in black. And as you can see, it's going to go together really nicely with this black hose that we're going to use. Now, over here what we've got is Earl's Super Stock hose. Basically, it's a black rubber hose with a working pressure of up to 250 psi. Now, you can see it's just, there's no stainless steel reinforcement, and what we like about this stuff, besides its 250 psi working pressure, is that it's really easy to use. It works in conjunction with these special barbed fittings, and the installation is really easy. I'll show you that in a minute. Now, the last hose that we're going to be working with today is Earl's Power Steering Hose. Now, this goes on the pressure side of your power steering pump down to the steering box, and it has a working pressure of 2,250 psi. Now, that's going to be more than enough for what we need. It's got a nice braided fitting on the outside, again, for anti-abrasion capabilities there, and it also uses a very specialized fitting. Now, they're very similar to the AN fittings, but these are made out of steel, and they work together like this. The installation is pretty much the same as with an AN fitting. And I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and show you how this stuff all goes together. All right. Now, the first thing that we've got to do once we've determined the length of the hose we need is we're going to have to cut it to that length. Now, once you've determined the length of your hose, we're ready to make the cut. And the first thing that we want to do is give it a wrap with some tape to kind of keep the ends from fraying when you're making the cut. Now, I like to use duct tape. Other people have used masking tape or whatever. The main thing is that you get it on there and it secures the end. Now, once we're ready to make the cut, we've got air in the shop here, so we use a die grinder with a cutoff wheel on it. It gives a nice, clean, easy, and quick cut. If you don't have the luxury of air, of course, you can always use a trusty hacksaw. Now, what you want to make sure, though, is that you've got a fine-tooth hacksaw blade in here, at least 32 teeth per inch. Now, I have friends of mine that tell me that they've also used a cutoff saw, which works, but what you want to do is make sure that you use whatever's handy and that you make a nice, clean cut on there. It'll make putting that fitting on a whole lot easier. Now, I know that we told you that we're going to be using those black Anatough fittings here, but for demonstration purposes, we're going to use the colored stuff, make it a little bit easier for you to see. First thing we do is we take the fitting apart. If you look inside of the fitting there, you'll see there are threads in there, and they go counterclockwise. What that's going to do is it's going to really help seat the hose inside of this fitting here. Well, now we can go ahead and chuck the fitting up here in the vise, just so we've got a nice stable platform to work with. Here's a little tip for you. Now, we've threaded the hose into this red fitting here, and I'm going to put a little piece of tape around here to show us where the end mark is, so that when we get to assembling the pieces, we'll be able to tell whether it's pushing the hose out or not. Now we'll just put a little lube on the threads of the fitting there, a little bit on the inside of the hose, and we'll just start threading it onto the blue fitting. Now we're going to keep on tightening this red fitting here until the gap between the red fitting and the blue is 23 to 46 thousandths. Now we're going to use a 30 thousandths feeler gauge here because it's kind of right in the middle. There it is. And that ought to get it. All right, now one more tip before we're done with this. You want to make sure that in case there was any trash or anything that went down into the line, just give it a quick blow. There we go. Make sure you get all that trash out of there. Well, now we're going to work with this Earl Superstock hose. You remember what I told you about this stuff being really easy to use? Well, it is. I'm going to show you just how easy it is. And we'll start by making a cut. Again, once you've determined what your length is, I use this hose cutter that I got down at Sears, and it just slices through this thing like a hot knife through butter. That's all there is to it. Now, the next thing you want to do is take the little ferrule here and just slip it over the end, just like that. Okay. All right, now we're going to chuck the fitting up in the vise again, just so we have, again, a good stable platform to work with. That ought to do it. And then we'll put a little bit of oil right on this fitting here. A little bit on the inside. And you see these barbs? All we're going to do is push that on. There we go, until it's fully seated. That's all it is to that. It doesn't get much easier than that. Well, now the last piece of hose that we're going to be working with is the power steering hose with that 2250 psi. Now, it uses a fitting that's very similar to the other one. In fact, if you look inside of this, you'll see those threads that go counterclockwise in here to help make the thread grab the hose and thread it in there and seat it fully. Now we're going to go ahead and put this hose in the fitting here. If you remember, those threads are counterclockwise, so what I do is I push in and turn counterclockwise at the same time. We'll do this until it bottoms out in the fitting there. All right, now this one's a little bit tougher than the other ones to get started here, but we're still going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil on there, put a little bit of oil on the inside of the fitting here. And once we get things started, just thread that on there. Now, once we've got this started on the fitting here, we're going to go ahead and lay a piece of tape in there to serve as our marker again to make sure that the hose isn't pushing out while we're tightening up that fitting. Now, you might remember that on the other fittings there, we were looking for 23 to 46 thousandths clearance here between the one half of the fitting and the other. This one here, we're just going to tighten it up till it bottoms out. Well, the tape didn't slip, so we know we got a good installation there. Now again, just like with the other hoses, one last step we want to do is go ahead and blow everything out, make sure any debris that might have gotten in there is blown out. Now we're going to go ahead and plumb this power steering hoses first. Here's a little tip for you. Whenever you get ready to tighten these things, make sure that you hold the adapter or whatever you're screwing into good and solid with another wrench. That way you can tighten it up, and that'll ensure that you get a good seal there. Okay, now what we're going to do is hook up from the cooler back up here to the steering box. Now, the way we plumb that cooler is pressure from the pump goes into the inlet side of the power steering box, comes out on this side, goes back through the cooler, and then comes up here and it goes into the remote reservoir. Now, in order to make all this happen, we had to get these special adapters here from Detroit Speed. They come in, depending on what kind of gearbox you're using, they come in both the metric with the O-ring fittings or just a standard tapered flare fitting. This is a metric box out of a Jeep, if you remember, so we use the metric kind with the O-rings on it. Now I've gone ahead and removed the power steering pump so we can replace this stock fitting with this one from our friends at Detroit Speed. This will allow us to use AN fittings on here, and it just replaces it perfectly. All right, now the high pressure hose goes onto this side of the power steering box, and we'll connect it to the power steering pump once I get that reinstalled. Go. Okay. Well, I went ahead and fabbed up my transmission cooler lines here. Now they'll just attach to the side of the transmission where I've already installed these adapters. These go from 1/4 inch NPT to a -6. Go ahead and cinch these down with a wrench. Since these are AN fittings, you don't have to torque them down. All you have to do is get that good seal on the inside there where it flares. It doesn't take an excessive amount of torque. I think we're good to go. But now we're going to turn our attention to the fuel system. Now, when we dropped the tank in earlier today, I'd already run all these lines and kind of estimated how long they needed to be. So now I've got them run up by the frame rail like we were going to. And this is the pressure line here. So we're going to plumb it into the fuel filter, and then it goes on up into the fuel rails. So I've already marked where we need to make the cut. That ought to give us a little bit of slack there. And we'll make the cut, put our fittings on there, and we'll be set on the pressure side. The other line that comes from the gas tank is the return line, and it's ultimately going to come off of our regulator here. So my plan is to create a sort of a fake firewall where I can mount the computer and the regulator, and then we'll be able to connect this. That's going to have to come at a later time, but as you can see, we've got plenty of hose here to make that connection, and we'll tend to it later. Now we had to remove the power steering pump in order to get the AN fitting on there. So now we've got that done, so we're ready to bolt it back up. Now with the pump securely bolted back in place, last thing we have to do is hook up the high pressure hose. All right, now we'll just take the tension off of the tensioner here, slide the belt back in place. There we go. We're back in business. You know, while I'm down here, we have one more operation we might as well take care of. We're going to install the O2 sensor. Now, installing the O2 sensor isn't that difficult, but its placement is kind of critical. What you want to do is get it about 6 inches down from the collector, and that'll allow it to get a good sampling of the exhaust as it comes out. And you also want to get, I don't know, just a slight angle, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees. And what that's going to do is it's going to point it down, and it'll prevent the condensation from the exhaust from getting up in there and doing damage to your O2 sensor. So I've determined that right about here should be a good spot. I'm going to go ahead and mark it. There we go. And then we'll take this pipe off, we'll drill it and weld it, and we'll have our O2 deal in place where it needs to be, and then we can move on to the next project. Now, the O2 sensor requires that a 3/4 inch hole be drilled into this head pipe here. So I've already drilled a 1/4 inch starter hole for us. Now, what I've got here is a step bit. We're going to just go ahead and insert that in there and keep drilling until we get that 3/4 inch size that we need. Now, before we start welding, it's always a good idea to kind of dress out the inside of that newly drilled hole there to get rid of any loose grindings or metal shards that might be in there. And then we're about ready to start welding now. And now the O2 sensor comes with a threaded nut that's a bung, and it just welds directly to the pipe, and it retains the O2 sensor in place there. All right, now we're ready to go ahead and reinstall this head pipe. Go ahead and torque down these head flange bolts, and then the clamp that holds the head pipe in place to the rest of the exhaust. And finally, we can screw the O2 sensor into place. Now, if you've been with us since the beginning of this LS installation, you probably remember that we used Holley oil pan to facilitate its installation. But when you run into some steering interference in lock-to-lock situation, you see where the steering linkage comes in contact with the oil pan. Now, Holley's since modified that oil pan to give us the clearance that we need on Chevelles. Let me show you what we've got. Well, to correct that interference problem between the steering linkage and the oil pan, here's what Holley's come up with. Where the sump would actually extend itself all the way to the front of the pan here, you can see where they've actually created a scallop. And that's going to give us the clearance that we need between the linkage and the oil pan. On the inside, you see that it's been changed on the inside as well, which also necessitates the use of this new pickup that comes with the oil pan. As you can see, it's got a little extra kick in here to comply with that extra kick up in the front of the oil pan. And well, the windage tray is the same, all the hardware is the same, but this will work on any 64 to 72 GMA body. Now, that about wraps it up for today. Next time when we come back, we're going to wire it and we're going to fire it. So you want to be sure to join us in a couple of weeks.